Hi everyone, and welcome to our final workshop in the Urbit Encode Hackathon series. It will be given by Anthony and Neil from Urbit, and it is called Bite-Sized App Ideas for Urbit. That's it from me, just a bit of housekeeping. If you'd like to ask a question, please feel free to put your hand up or type a question in the chat. It would be lovely if you could put your cameras on. It's always nice to see you. I will send some links in the chat, so you have the Discord, the Hackerpack, all the usual stuff. And yeah, you can always find all of us in the Discord as well, as I mentioned. So that's everything from me. So I will hand you over to Neil and Anthony for the workshop.
All right, thank you. And Anthony is on here as Pulduk Tontag.
Hello.
Oh, okay, hey.
Boom.
Hi, Anthony, how you doing?
Good, how about yourself? I wasn't sure if I should put my ship name or my real name, but I'm Anthony. Nice to meet everyone.
Welcome. Well, let's see. The past couple of workshops, we were staying pretty technical and looking at what was involved with understanding the architecture of Urbit as a development platform, and a little bit of Hoon and what it looks like to build on Urbit apps and agents. And for this workshop today, I wanted to sort of talk through some ideas for apps that could be built in the span of a hackathon. Excuse me. And as well, take a look at some of the existing apps that are out there so people can get an idea about how big an Urbit app is. Like, if you're going to start developing something, you want to know how much you're biting off when you have a particular idea in mind. And of course, some things are, Urbit gives you some things like persistent identity and peer-to-peer end-to-end encrypted communications and stuff for free. So things that rely on those kinds of communications are relatively straightforward. For instance, if you take a look at the Campfire app, this uses Urbit as the handshake with WebRTC. So it sets up the two peers on WebRTC, and then it uses WebRTC to do video communication between two people. So that's an illustration of something that's using Urbit to connect, whereas most of the actual communication is then taking place over a different protocol. So just some different ideas in that vein there. Anthony, you want to add anything to that?
One thing that I think talking about things that can be scoped down or are sort of like compact, one thing that I like to think about is that, as Neil pointed out, there's like basically chat or communicate, peer-to-peer communication, identity, all for free, and thinking about how to layer that on top of other things, so just for example, I know there's a plugin that's existed several times, and it keeps getting banned, right? Where it's like you can put your own comment section on any website. Yeah, I remember this was big on Hacker News, right? It's like you could have you and your friends could be commenting on a public website, for example. So there's a lot of stuff like that where you think about overlaying some sort of social thing from the Urbit side on top of information that's publicly available. And so that would be as simple, and you could do that for any number of, you could imagine your own kind of private chats and stuff, but using some publicly available Web2 API as kind of the starting point. And that would be as simple as building the thread to actually get that data, and then just using, like we were talking about, just the kind of built-in communication stuff that Urbit has. So that kind of whole genre of private metadata or chats or stuff like that on top of publicly available Web2 stuff, I think is probably an interesting, kind of way to think about stuff.
Yeah, and that actually takes it in a direction that I hadn't noted in some of my ideas here. One of the things I was going to point out, let's see, there's a comment here about radio. Yeah, radio is an interesting one where I think I don't have it turned on my ship right now, but essentially it's it's like a watch party app where you can link up a YouTube video to it, and then you have a shared chat channel, and everyone's synchronized with watching a particular YouTube video. So again, it's another one of these situations where it's pulling in Web 2 components and it's using Urbit as a value add to coordinate activity there. There's some opportunities that are going to be coming up now because this week the new chat and forum features are dropping. Urbit has had the same chat platform since early 2020. I think January 2020 was when it dropped. And it's been used, and people have written some chat bots and things for it. And there's a new complete from scratch rewrite that uses a different internal architecture. It has several different apps that are built to interlock with each other. So it's trying to exemplify the idea of, how do you write one app that does one thing well? So, you have one chat app, you have one publishing, blogging app, you have one direct message app, and then these things are able to smoothly integrate with each other. And it's trying to exemplify the world that Urbit is trying to build, where you don't have fully siloized pieces. The fact that it's dropping this week, it's been in beta testing for a while now, public beta, but it's going to get rolled out to everyone on Thursday or Friday of this week. And at that point, a lot of the older chatbots and so forth won't work with the new architecture because it's been rewritten. So I think there's an opportunity to step in and write some useful tools that fit there, that it would be attractive to people, and I think judged well for this is also.
The one thing I was going to say about chatbots are just this beautiful, huge subject, right? And I think that there's all kinds of opportunities to build new chatbots. And I think in terms of a personal, like a project, like in terms of how much you'll learn about Urbit, it's actually kind of a great thing to undertake, because you can learn about how to parse the actual messages if you want to give it like commands that do certain things. And it's like I think really the any Discord bot you can imagine basically building a supercharged Urbit version of that. So I don't know about every Discord bot, but it seems like there's a lot of variations in it. But all those things can be built within Urbit, and I think are pretty good bite-sized tasks in a lot of ways, because a lot of the chat stuff is already taken care of. So you're talking about parsing, interpreting the messages, and then firing off an action based on that message. And I think it's actually a really good way to learn your way around how to, how pokes and the different ways that applications pass RPC commands basically to each other. So I think that's a really cool sort of whole area, is the chatbot thing. And I can imagine doing some of these cool language models as a sidecar as well, but I don't really know. That might be a little bit outside of the scope of this.
We also, with the new forum features, we finally have emoji reacts, which has been something people have wanted for a long time. We have reactions, and a lot of Discord bot functionality is built on aptly using reactions.
That's a good point.
To build polls and automated unlocking of various features. So I think that's a fairly low-lying fruit for a team to tackle there.
Yeah. That's a good
and probably wouldn't need a lot of front end work either if it's someone who wants to dig into the pure Hoon side of things.
Is that is those I'm not familiar with these. I don't use Discord a lot. Is the idea that I think the example I heard was you basically have to read a post and click thumbs up, and then it'll unlock another chat or something.
Right.
Is that the simplest one is kind of have some action based on. I mean, that's a great idea, and that's the kind of thing where that could be built out pretty easily now.
And I think it'd be attractive for someone looking at just building a nice integration. There's kind of a spectrum of the types of things you could build on Urbit. I've talked about this to some extent before, where if you want to write something that's pure Hoon language Urbit app, then you're basically treating Urbit as a backend. You're treating it as a server, and you're writing server-side application that takes advantage of the things that Urbit is good at. And you could build it as a command line application. You could build it with someone else on your team works on the front end and so forth. But this is sort of where I leaned when I was talking about things in the second workshop with, what does it look like to build an Urbit native app and let that run. Then there are more front end oriented tools where perhaps you're building a front end that talks to an existing Urbit app. The advantage of this would be that all you have to know is where the API endpoints are and how to talk HTTP and JSON to whatever that Urbit backend is. And I think one of our prizes is best front end / user experience. So if that's your strength, that's a great place to explore there. There are other integrations you can do. Login with Urbit ID offers the possibility of using existing services with Urbit ID. Basically, you can do an attestation or authentication that you own an Urbit point, and then you're able to use that to build or to log into an existing Web 2 service the same way as OAuth or Shibboleth works in many regards. Anthony, would Handshake be something that you could adapt to that functionality as well?
Handshake meaning the ENS, the domain.
Handshake was the one that showed you it generated a QR code.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, that's actually a whole, I don't know how well maintained Handshake is, but that's a great concept, right? Where basically bringing that kind of authentication, right? I forget. Authentication, right? Authorization, authentication. I was getting them switched up. Authentication into the real world. So like basically bridging a gap from like I, human being, own this ship. And that's kind of what Handshake did, using a QR code and a mobile app, I believe.
Yeah.
And so but that's also like a great either beefing that up and just sort of making sure that all still works. Like I said, I think that was like more of a concept. I'm not sure that how well maintained it is. Or if it does work, then the authorization piece, right? So like being able to take ship side actions based on someone proving that they own a point, right? So like could be as simple as like adding this person to a whitelist that can be consumed later to download an app, right? Like let's say I have an app and I only want to make it available to people that I've verified in real life, that kind of stuff. So like taking the ship side permissions and basing it on real world actions is also a really interesting idea.
Yep. And you could do that either using the ship directly, which is what Handshake does. It has an app component that runs on your ship, so you can sort of in real time verify this. But you could also do an Urbit ID integration of some kind where you're just looking at the azimuth state and somehow you're demonstrating that you own that wallet address, for instance. Because that's the other thing. Another one of the categories that I've pointed out to people is, if you're a strong Solidity developer, if you prefer to work with interfaces to contracts, dApps, and so forth, then you can build Urbit ID integrations that are using the Azimuth and Ecliptic contracts, which are written in Solidity exclusively, and just look at the public key infrastructure of Urbit and not even look at the implementation, the Urbit OS side. What about, let's see, let's take a quick look at urbit.org/ecosystem. I wanted to talk through some of the apps that are already out there. But if you go to urbit.org, it's the plain side, and you go to ecosystem. Let me zoom in a little bit here for everyone. Then on the left-hand side here, it has various things that are going on the Urbit network. This is our bridge website so that we can expose a lot of things that are taking place on the Urbit network to the broader web, just so people can locate groups, find out more about individuals, applications, and so forth. there's an applications page, and it includes a lot of the tools that have been, it includes the tools that have been submitted. There are other apps as well that are out there, but this gives you an idea of the kinds of things that are out there. So these are all different apps that you could click into. Here's Campfire, which is the voice and video chat. So it would give you instructions about how to install it and actually access that, where the source website is. So if you wanted to work with some of these things, then you'd be able to go dig around it. Although actually it looks like this one needs to be redirected. And so you can poke around and see like sort of like how big an Urbit app is. Some of these are quite small. Some of them are pretty involved. So they do a lot of different kinds of things here. I guess Gate might be is that Handshake? No, Handshake's here. This is the Urbit IDs via QR code.
Yeah, there we go.
So there are a lot of these. Some of them are simpler, like Kenning is basically an Anki style spaced repetition app. I think there's another spaced repetition app that was around for a while. SRRS, I don't know whatever happened to that one. Maybe that got upgraded. Anyway, so there's a number of them you could click through here and sort of see like how complicated is it to build an app. So Rumors is an anonymized kind of a global Twitter page that you could log into, and basically you see it's a gossip protocol where you can see things posted by friends of friends on the network, but it's all anonymized, so you don't actually know who's saying things. So you could click in and say, well, like, okay, like how big of an application is that actually? And since Paldev, who is Fang, who is Mark, posts everything in one single gigantic repo, it's actually a little bit hard to show that. But if I click into Rumors, that's about how long the main page for Rumors is. Like as an app goes, we're talking maybe a couple hundred lines of code, 150 lines of code here, and then there's probably a library for the gossip protocol and stuff that he's pulling in. But it's really quite a simple application to do what it does. So there are ideas that you could riff off of looking at apps that currently exist.
I would also, let me just go a plug for Mark. I would say that like I do think that Mark has some really great. He's a great Hoon stylist, and I would Neil, I'm not sure if you agree, but I think his app code is probably really good to look over just for everybody, just as a great example. So plug for him. I would say read it. Even if you're not going to do stuff like he does, I think he's got some great stuff.
He probably considers that one too simple, but he tends to adopt a very literate programming style where the code is self-documenting. So everything lives in the application, and then you can interact. It documents itself is his philosophy in developing these things. So yes. Let's see. So some of the ideas there. Another thing that's worth looking at is on the Urbit developers site. If you come on here and you go to the Lightning tutorials, these are 3 short apps that are fully documented tutorials that are designed to show you how you would implement MVPs for a few different applications. These 3 actually interact with each other. They can stand alone, or they can work with each other. The 3 examples we have are, one of them basically builds friend collections, Twitter server, like think of it as whatever metaphor from Web2 you like, but it builds a way of managing lists of users with whom you'd like to maintain some sort of associated contact. An encrypted chat application, kind of a Signal-like. It's not really Signal because it doesn't do the axolotl protocol or whatever they ended up renaming it to. But it's a similar idea of, you have an end-to-end encrypted chat application that's built on giving access to certain people in your groups. And then there's a ring signature voting app. There are other polling or voting apps, which are sort of voiced towards DAOs and building options for DAOs as well, such as Ballot is a good one of those. So, let you build proposals, and it includes things like the ability to delegate votes to other people in the group, should you wish to do that. Ring signature is a little bit different because ring signature lets you obscure who actually voted for which which option. So you can still have it be a cryptographically secure, but somewhat anonymized poll there. So those three are good ones to look at if you want to get an idea of, what is a moderately complex Urbit app. I guess the page is rather long because there's so much commentary, but you get the idea for what these different components look like, and it does a very good job of explaining, the 10 arms, the 10 parts of the application interface that Urbit expects. It does a good explanation of what each one of them is and does, and why it matters, why it has the structure it has for these particular apps, as you look through those. Anthony, do you know what the status of the Urbit Visor Chrome extension is?
Meaning, is it still being maintained?
Is it still being maintained?
I believe it still works. So I mean, there's that. I don't think it hasn't been taken down as far as I can tell, and it's great. I mean, the guys who it was a company that had to basically move on to other Web3 pastures, but they did a lot of good work for the ecosystem. And yeah, there is a Chrome extension that will essentially allow you to directly connect your all the calls from your web browser to your ship, which is actually a very nice affordance. But that should still work.
And it has a Twitter integration, so it does, like if you've used Brave, you'll notice that Brave injects tipping on several websites. It does something similar where it injects a share on Urbit button on Twitter. And so I think if you're comfortable writing, it is a Chrome only. I mean, it's Chrome platform, so Brave would pick it up as well. Firefox would not. If you're comfortable writing browser extensions, then that's one to take a look at as well, where you could write something that gives you a nice Web2 integration. Okay, I think that's my main list of things that I think are worth thinking about for you coming into this hackathon. Okay, so here's a good question, and Anthony, you might know more about this. So Urbit ID has a wallet address, and can we transfer coins to Urbit ID? Okay, so how does the Urbit ID azimuth address space relate to Ethereum addresses? I'm not sure that I actually know the answer to this offhand.
So, yeah, so your Urbit ID belongs to an Ethereum address. Probably the easiest way to think about it, right? It's owned by an Ethereum address. And if you've set it up using so there's actually two related concepts that we got to distinguish here. There's an Urbit ID, which is the PAT-P, the name, all that stuff, which is owned by an Ethereum address, and that's actually that's like the minimal implementation, let's say, meaning it has to have an associated Ethereum address, which is its master address. But there's also a thing called an Urbit HD wallet, and this is what you see if you've gotten any of these. Yeah, thank you for that link. Stuart just put a link in there. So there's basically a hierarchically derived wallet structure that is the one that you get when you sign up through Bridge, any official way, let's say through urbit.org or Bridge or Tlon or whatever. That is the structure that owns your Urbit ID. And so what that means is there's actually at minimum 3 addresses associated with your Urbit ID. And the reason that you do that is so that there's scoped permissions. So that means that there's one address that can do anything. It's another address that can only boot a ship, but it can't actually transfer itself. That would be kind of like your hot address. And then there's another one that can transfer it only, for example. But that's all to say that there's always an Ethereum address that is associated with your Urbit ID on chain. And if you're interested in poking around with this, there's a lot of interesting stuff here. You should GitHub Urbit/Azimuth has links to all of the Etherscan pages that have all the deployed contracts. So you can just mess around and see all the stuff you can actually do, like see which address owns which point, for example. But so yeah, I'm getting around to this question. Can you transfer coins to your Urbit ID? What you can do is you can transfer tokens to that, or actually really to any Ethereum address, and have your Urbit watch that address. And when something comes in, it can take some action, right? So it can pull the chain, and it can update a wallet. It can do whatever. So that's actually a really good, there's all that stuff. I mean, I think in my previous statement, I said, oh, you can watch Web 2 stuff, right? And comment on that, take actions based on that. But of course, all the Web 3 stuff works as well, right? So you can also keep track of chain state and have your Urbit take actions based on chain state. The most obvious being that, you get a Dogecoin to this address that's associated with your Urbit ID, and then you increment the number in the interface, right? That's like the most basic action, but you could imagine arbitrarily complex actions. And so that's a whole realm of stuff. And you can, Neil, you probably might know the code base better than I do, but like there's a lot of utilities already in the code base for watching Ethereum state, because basically that's how we do our whole PKI. So there's plenty of utilities in the code base already to watch the Ethereum state. So you can probably just use a lot of stuff from there.
Yes, and there's a related question. Does Urbit have hardware wallet integrations? Urbit ID will let you use hardware wallets the same way that you could with any Ethereum address login. So in that sense, it does. There's not,
but not the Urbit itself.
Yeah, Urbit OS does not have a hardware wallet integration. And actually, it's probably a good idea at this point to talk a little bit about security of different parts of the Urbit network. The internal Urbit network, which we call AIMS, but it's the peer-to-peer end-to-end encrypted part of the network, has been audited and is considered secure. Azimuth has been audited. The Urbit ID smart contracts have been audited and are considered secure. The Urbit OS, like a running ship instance, is not considered secure, not because we have like major known vulnerabilities, but because we have not audited it pending, like optimization and security audits are kind of the last thing you do when you're launching something. So it hasn't been a priority to do that. So for instance, I would say if you are going to work with transactions, you should consider Urbit as a non-custodial agent with respect to keys other than the keys that Urbit ID already inherently holds. So like there is a Bitcoin application, there's a Bitcoin wallet on Urbit, but it is non-custodial. You should keep your own keys. It doesn't store the keys in Urbit OS's state at any point. Anything you should add about that?
No, but I think that's also, if someone's interested in, this is probably actually, I'm just going to tell you something. It's probably out of the scope of the hackathon, but it's a very interesting problem, which is that there's been this concept. So you have an Urbit, and an Urbit is connected to the network at all times. So like even when it is totally audited and stuff, there's always like, what is any web server holding your keys is kind of like a dubious, it's always, people are going to have not want to do that probably. And so one thing that we've discussed a bit is how in the sort of final state would you sign transact, where should the keys live basically? And one thing that we've talked about is the ability to have, let's say you have a ship that lives on the cloud, and Neil, I'm not familiar with how much you've introduced these concepts. Just reel me in if these are.
I think we're okay at this point.
Okay, so like most people's ships will live connected to the internet, will live on the cloud, let's say. But it may be that what you want to do is have the ability to, when you're going to do a transaction, a crypto transaction, you actually have your Moon or some other identity on the network, that is on your laptop, on a personal computer, that can sign the transaction for you. So there's a little bit of stuff to be thought through here that I'd be interested. I mean, if people think that they can take that on, or interested in um, partially signed transactions, how all that stuff work, I don't really know that much, but maybe you guys do. The idea of because we do have this encrypted network, format the transaction on your main ship, send it back to your laptop, sign it there, and then send it back, etc. So that is a possibility. So that's a whole open area. So if anyone really wants to bite off a lot, that's an interesting thing that can be worked on.
That might be a bit much for a hackathon, but yeah, I think
I think so.
In broader terms, we are interested in that question. There's a question here about calling the Urbit API from Postman. Yes, the main thing that you need to know with interacting with an Urbit ship via an API is you need to know the endpoints and, of course, the JSON format that it expects. And under certain circumstances, depending on the action you're taking, you may need the cookie, which does require knowing something about the ship. There's a password that's randomly generated for every ship that you would have to actually hit it with a secured call using, and you would do a secured call with the password and then get the cookie back at that point. So you would formally, you'd want to do everything in HTTPS to actually make that initial call and get that cookie back, but then you'd be able to do whatever API calls you want on the ship. As with a regular server, it's kind of hard to answer that in a generic way because it depends on which API endpoints, what are you talking to, what are you trying to do to build something. But yes, in general, you could use a tool like Postman that's stitching APIs together to instrument or talk to an Urbit ship. One more thing I was going to show you all. Where's this one? Okay. On developers.urbit.org, there is a page called the app workbook under the guides. Let me go back to sharing this here. So, if you're anywhere on the guides, there's an app workbook here that you can click into that show you how to do various things, annotated tutorials similar to the Lightning tutorials that we have at the top there. One of them is Flap, which is it's a Flappy Bird implementation where you have a JavaScript client, and then I'm in dark mode, so you can't see anything with the graphics, but you get the idea. It's building a Flappy Bird clone that's served from the Urbit ship, and then has some integration across ships, so you can share a leaderboard and this sort of work as well. So this is probably a good one to look at, where if you wanted to build an integration of something that's a regular front end for something else that would be served from any server, this is how you would set it up, build it, and then serve and distribute it to other people on the network. So I'll drop that one in the chat as well. Let's see, are there other questions? Let's see, some examples of DeFi apps that can be built in Urbit. So Books is one that was linked a little bit up channel there. Books is a kind of an aggregator for being able to watch all of your transactions. There is the Uniswap one that was actually put out fairly recently. There's a Bitcoin wallet. What's the status of the Gnosis Safe app?
That should be just about done. I'm not sure if the in progress code is anywhere. Stuart, do you know? Just in the chat. But yeah, so just to clarify what Neil was saying there, the Uniswap, there is an example of hosting a front end, of the Uniswap front end from your Urbit, which is relatively actually pretty straightforward. But the what's been cool for the Gnosis one is Gnosis, the Gnosis Safe DApp uses local storage quite heavily, and so he's doing a thing where he's not only rehosting the front end code, but he's also swapping in basically using your Urbit instead of the local storage in the browser. So you just kind of, which is I think a really interesting pattern, and probably, and I forget exactly how he's doing it, but he's doing it in such a way that it can ingest just a GitHub front end, so you know it's running the actual Gnosis safe DApp and not just some man in the middle thing that we did. So that's an interesting pattern. So I think that if there's other DeFi dApps that are still of interest, I think that'd be interesting to try it, doing stuff like that, like swap, seeing where it's using local storage. Maybe there's a little Urbit integration that can be done there. I mean, right now we basically have Uniswap and Gnosis, I think, in the pipeline, but there are others, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that Urbit offers you is the ability to have a secure, portable state machine record of off-chain events. And so we've thought a lot about, you could sign something with a hash for some particular transaction, do these kinds of operations. People have done these on Ethereum and other chains for a while. But I think Urbit will offer you a way of being able to sign transactions, off-chain calculations of various kinds, and upload that hash to the chain, and then you can attest that this actually took place in supporting some particular set of dApps or smart contracts and so forth. Obviously, that's like it's practical, but it's a fairly theoretical thing where you'd have to think carefully about what you're saying at each point and what's being done on chain and off chain, but it's worth exploring as well. Are you looking at the ZKP?
Yeah.
Question there. So there's a startup on Urbit called Uqbar, UQBAR, that has been very interested in zero knowledge proofs, and they're building a currently layer 2. Ultimately, they want to back bootstrap it as a layer 1. And they've been working a lot on zero knowledge proofs. So some of their work is public, some is not. Might be worth touching base with them if you're interested in doing ZKP applications. I don't know about Scrypt tools myself, so I can't comment further on that. Question about, do chat applications host from a single server? Okay, so the chat applications that are built right now, someone hosts a chat room, and it's kind of a hub and spoke model where you are talking to people via that host third party. Building a chat room that is federated or using a gossip protocol instead. Rumor used a gossip protocol, but it also anonymized everything. So it's sort of not a true chat room in the same sense as, normally we like to know who we're talking to on a forum. There's some things you could do there that I think would be reasonably simple and straightforward to adapt from existing models of chat rooms. You'd basically
That's
be having
interesting.
to
Just
an ordered map or something.
De-anonymized rumors basically would be you're right. It's just like, or
right,
not anonymized rumors.
Right, you're still using the gossip protocol as it's built, but you're not stripping the information. I think that's one you could chase pretty quickly.
That's pretty interesting.
Let's see, can a ship access Earth's file system? Yes. Okay, so Urbit has its own internal file system, similar to, if you've worked with Docker, you know that Docker has a file system, and if you want to connect it to the file system of the underlying host VM, you have to do some work to make sure that those things are synchronizing correctly with each other. If you've used, depending on different SQL or, things like Hadoop and some of these older Apache tools, right? There's a lot of tools that have a notion of their own file system that's separate from the file system of the host cloud instance. In some ways, Git and GitHub are a file system also. Yes, you can synchronize the Urbit file system with the host OS file system. If you want to look into that, you're going to look into mounting the file system on developers.urbit.org. So there's a mount and a commit step. Mount means make them aware of each other. Commit means synchronize them. So it will be the two steps that you would have to take. And most of your development, what you'll be doing is you'll be writing things in a VS Code or whatever on the host OS, and then you'll synchronize it to the Urbit ship when you need to make it talk to things. Let's see, other questions that came up here. If you're deploying an application that wants to create a signed Ethereum transaction in the app, does the Bitcoin wallet ask you to insert your private key? So it's non-custodial, but you would still need the private key in the client session to actually sign transactions, but it wouldn't be stored in the ship. It would just be in the transient client state that the browser has there when you're doing that. Is there a DC Spark Rust chatbot API? I'm not sure. I'd have to go dig around in DC Spark's repos to see what there is in those terms. Can we access apps in Comets? Yes. Comets can participate in a lot of things on the network, but since they're intended to be transient, their updates and so forth are turned off by default. You can turn them back on by turning on over-the-air updates. OTAs would be the thing to look up in those cases, but you can access apps in Comets. Let's see, can Dojo trigger sounds in terminal like Vim ding? Okay, so there's kind of two things going on there. One is, what does your terminal client interpret as a bell character, right? So there's an ASCII bell character that would trigger a ding. Presumably, if your terminal client has a handler for it, then Urbit could emit that when it actually hits the terminal client, but you'd have to look into what your terminal emulator does there. More broadly speaking, Urbit you should think of as a server, and so if it is triggering sounds, it's doing something, it's sending it to a front end, a browser, or something else that knows how to emit a sound.
Yeah, Ben, I think that's if the overall question is how could you make your Urbit make a sound, right? It's like then I mean, it's sort of a loaded question, right? Because like if you're talking about Dojo running on your personal machine, then that sound is being triggered in your terminal emulator. If you're running WebTerm, right, then it's the browser that's making the sound. And there's actually all kinds of existing libraries in JavaScript that will make all kinds of sounds. So it would actually be like, once you got that stuff hooked up, having your Urbit make any kind of sound would be relatively easy to do. It's a matter of just generating some sort of data from the Urbit side, and then having a library on the front end that can make arbitrary sounds. And so, web audio, there's lots of web audio libraries that are varying degrees of, having to mess with it. Some are really ready to go, and some are pretty low level.
The Flappy Bird tutorial does show you
good.
how to serve an MP3 MIME type, and you actually have to add it to the Urbit ship. So it walks you through what it takes to, or it's not MP3, sorry, it's a wave. But it does walk you through how to add an audio wave type, so Urbit is aware of it and knows how to serve it as a MIME type to the browser. It's just serving it and the browser's doing all the work, but you do have to actually, one of the things about the Urbit file system is, one of the advantages is that it knows, when it knows about a type, it knows how to do interesting things like transformation. So if you access, so if you have something that's plain text and you access it through a JSON type, then it automatically does the conversion for you. But the downside is you can't have generic untyped data on your Urbit file system. So if you're adding a wave file and it doesn't actually know what a wave file is, you have to tell it how to read a wave file. So that's what the tutorial tells you how to do. Basically, it's just telling it how does it store a wave file as raw binary data, which is what a wave file is. But you have to do that step.
An idea, because I know that Ben and I know each other, so I know he's a musician. So I was going to say one thing that is sorely missed right now is some sort of dealing with MIDI data in Urbit, because there's basically there's nothing that will there's no, as far as I know, no MIDI mark. You can't keep any kind of MIDI files in your Urbit. So serving something like that is like very interesting. And there's and like if you have the ability just to pass MIDI data and manipulate MIDI data on your Urbit, pass it to the front end. Like I said, there's plenty of utilities that can interpret that MIDI data, and you wouldn't have to write that from scratch.
Urbit knows what a MIME type is. So anything that's regularly handled as a MIME value, which is most of the things that you're doing in a browser, it can at least store and transmit. There aren't native libraries to do things like construct an MP3 file. But I mean, that's not a thing you normally do anyway.
Yeah.
Or certainly not on a server.
I mean, you have to install a plugin to do it with Audacity, right? I mean, or
Yeah.
you used to. It's not like it's that common.
Right.
But MIDI, and I mean, that's very interesting.
Practical question here. How can we
Ooh.
communicate with other fake ships in the local network? So if you are running them on the same ship, they will be able to see each other. So if I start a fake ship Zod and I start a fake ship Sample Palnet on the same ship in the same shared memory, they will be able to talk to each other. They'll be able to poke each other, hi each other, communicate via apps and so forth.
On the same box is what you're saying, though, right?
Yeah,
Like
I'm saying on the same physical machine. Yeah.
So like it's yeah, usually people start a fake Zod, fake bus, fake neck. You know, that way you can just have all those things. I mean, one thing I wouldn't note though, it's like a lot of the documentation talks about fake Zods, but it is good to also have, you know, fake planets, because I've seen a lot of stuff where it's like people develop with fake galaxies and then they actually run into some bug where the whole namespace is not being handled. So
Cool. Thank you very much, Neil and Anthony. That was really interesting. I hope you guys have all got some interesting ideas for what you're going to build. If not, please do join the Discord. I know I keep pushing it, but I just really want to make sure everyone's in there. I've just sent a link again in the chat, and people will be around to help you with your questions. That was the final workshop in our series. So I want to say a really big thank you to the team at Urbit. It's been really good. For everyone else, the submission deadline for this hackathon is a month from now, on the 8th of January, I think. So you've got a while to get building. Everyone, please feel free to shoot me an email, message me in the Discord, book in a one-on-one. I've already spoken to a couple of you and you've had some really great ideas. So I'm excited to hear more about what you guys are going to build. And yeah, I'm really excited to see how this hackathon's going to go, what kind of cool projects you guys are going to come up with. So
the sign up deadline is tomorrow, isn't it? For Teams.
Is that right? Yeah. So I will also send the sign up link here in the chat. So please, yeah, sign up so we can track your submissions and you guys will be able to submit. Cool.
No, I'm excited to see what everyone does here. I've yeah, there's lots of good ideas here.
Cool. Right. Thanks very much, everyone. I look forward to hearing from you and see you soon.